inspire.
Welcome back to Started Now. I'm your host, Jeff Sarris. This is the show where I talk to entrepreneurs to reveal the unexpected paths to entrepreneurship. Today, my guest is Daniel Vassallo. Daniel has a great story, from leaving Amazon to give it a go on his own, to building his credibility online and finding his business, finding what he wanted to do, what he wants to do, and how he wants to spend his time through making small bets. We touch on all of that, on credibility, on small bets, on his story and how he's actually made a couple amazingly successful info products, despite never considering himself a writer or expecting to have info products be the main revenue source of his business. But through these small bets, he has found his place for right now, and he's continuing to make these bets and to see where he wants to go next. So without further ado, my conversation with Daniel Vassallo. What did the day hold for you so far then?
Oh, nothing yet. Literally, it's noon here. I woke up, played with the kids a little bit, and took a shower, and I'm here.
Oh yeah, no, that's perfect.
Yeah.
I'm in Chicago, so it is 2:00 right now here.
Right.
But I mean, this is pretty much the first thing I'm doing as well. I'm definitely a afternoon, evening, that's when I get my real focus time in. It's just I've always been geared that way, more of a night owl versus the early riser.
Same.
Yeah, and it's got to be nice too now that you can choose your own hours. You're able to, well, I don't know, actually with Amazon, was that flexible?
Yeah. Well, a little bit, but not definitely not as much as my current arrangement. There was, it was flexible in terms of when you start your day. There wasn't obviously you have to be here by 9, but nevertheless, something in the back of your head still that's your sole attention. That's what you should be doing. Whereas now I just feel more free that if I wanted to spend my time, my day, playing with my kids, going outside, doing something else, I don't feel guilty. I don't feel I'm letting anyone down. Right? It's just a choice that I make without sort of having to ask anyone for permission.
Yeah, that's the beauty of this lifestyle, because we're crafting it exactly as we want, and there isn't that nagging guilt, because it is weird.
Exactly.
Even when it is flexible with a job, there is always that oh, I should have been there at 8 a.m. or I should have done this, even if people aren't looking for it. It's interesting.
Exactly.
But I just saw that you are building a house in the forest. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, interesting. It's something that both me and my wife, we've always wanted to do, to sort of build our custom house. It was it's our one thing that we both like sort of spending money on, on many other things we're quite frugal, but on sort of our home, we sort of enjoy improving it. It's to be honest, I don't even remember how it happened. We've been looking for land for a long time, very, very casually, occasionally checking Zillow, just thinking about it. And I think something just felt like the right time right now. And basically, we're not, it's not something that we need to rush, right? So it's just we're enjoying the challenge, learning a lot, and when it finishes, it finishes. And sort of, taking another challenge, something else to make life interesting. And hopefully, the finished product will be something that that we'll enjoy.
Yeah, and you're starting from absolute zero experience with this then, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was almost embarrassed when I was talking with the agents and with other, because I knew absolutely nothing about wells and septic systems and sort of all the things that go into even just preparing the land. So, it was just fascinating, just again something to just make life interesting. And sometimes it's good to start with something with absolutely zero knowledge and just get that experience. Right? It's unbelievable how much you can learn nowadays, just from reading a few books, watching YouTube and online, and it's quite exhilarating.
Uh-huh.
That,
We're
2 months ago, I sort of complete blank
yeah.
knowledge, and now it's sort of I'm feeling comfortable with many of the things
Hmm.
that I need
And
to do.
choosing an undeveloped piece of land versus an actual spot where a home was or was already
Yeah.
prepared, I mean, that's a big undertaking. Was that part of the plan, sort of like ground
It
up?
was a bit of necessity, yeah, because I mean, we I think one of the constraints we had, we tried to stay in the region that we are right now, just not to disrupt too many things. The kids are familiar with the place. We have friends, we have roots, and here in the Seattle area, it's extremely competitive market. There's very little, pretty much anything that's available that's easy to build has already been taken, right? And it's
Yeah.
already been built. So the only remaining sites are challenging ones. That's what the architects call them, right? There's some big nuisance. Like in our case, the land was landlocked. There was no road access, so we had to negotiate with the neighbors. There was issues with, like, there was a wetland, there was a small stream passing through it, and you can't build to like 100 feet away from so it's sort of restricted. Lots of small things like this, which meant that all the builders and speculators and people who wanted like an easy sort of project stayed away from. So the search started where I was looking for easier things, like either a house that's been there and you tear it down and you build on it, maybe keep the foundation. But basically, very quickly, I realized that to stay within the budget, I had to sort of go after the harder sort of challenges. Or else I had
Definitely.
to move outside the radius that we've set, right? So that was the other option, which we tried not to, just to keep the sort of familiarity at least with the area.
Definitely. And I love how you started an Instagram page or
Yeah.
profile, and it's just like we'll get into social media and Twitter and everything, but like I love how you're using Instagram specifically with the focus of um just following your journey, documenting what you're doing, just like you
Yeah.
started with Twitter, and documenting how you're learning, what people can get from it. I think that's awesome. Like as soon as I saw that you like so it was just I think I just saw just the other day you tweeted about it that you set up
Yep.
the Instagram account, and yeah, it's perfect because it gives people a very clear vision of what to expect, gives you a clear vision of what to produce, and yeah, I love it. I love that approach.
Yeah. It's an experiment. So yeah, I never used Instagram before. I'm liking it actually quite a lot, even consuming nowadays. There's lots of, if you're focused on a specific topic, lots of interesting stuff to see.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, we'll see. I sort of it's fun to share, and we'll see where it goes.
Hmm. Yeah, so I wanted to start with the concept of small bets because
Yeah.
that sort of seems to be at the core. You've talked about small bets a little bit, and like at the core of what you're doing and what you are, how you're building your revenue. Because
Mhm.
maybe just rewind a little bit and give the cliff notes of Amazon to now, and then I want to dive into
Yeah.
small bets.
Yeah, so I think, long story short, I left Amazon early 2019 without a concrete sort of idea of what I was going to do next. However, vaguely in my head, like I had a list of preferences. For example, my first preference was to start a software as a service business. It's sort of, I felt like that was what I would enjoy doing most and was likely the most likely to succeed. Then I had like a series of other plan Bs, plan Cs, and other things in my head that I thought, like, if the first one fails, then I maybe try to do some freelancing. Maybe I try to write an ebook. Maybe I'll even consider like acquiring a small online business. There's like a market for $100,000 businesses that are generating, I don't know, a few $1,000s a month, and maybe I try to grow it. I had like 4 or 5 things in my head. And that's what I started doing. I started focusing on building a software business, and I think a little bit about 6 months in, I had a little bit of a small crisis in my head. I started sort of seeing all the uncertainty in front of me. Like, when will I notice when I should shift to plan B, for example? How long should I wait? Will I get some magical signal, right? That, it's time to shift attention to something else. This was making me really uncomfortable. And I sort of started wondering whether I should take a different approach. And I think sort of the approach that I've arrived to I feel like I should probably have taken from the beginning, which is sort of fundamentally is the idea of, instead of focusing 100% on one thing, just trying to do a few things in parallel, and try to optimize for things with sort of high odds of success, even if sort of the upside is not, even if you're sort of trading off the upside, right? But just sort of trying to go for the small, sort of safe to fail, high odds of success bets.
And maybe smaller upfront investment, right?
Exactly, like small in many things, like small upfront investment, small effort, small time to test and to get feedback about, because this is one of the problems I had with my software business. The feedback loop was extremely long. I mean, from the time I get a customer to sign up until they pay, until I realize whether there's momentum, it's like months and probably years. That which is very hard when you're trying to tame the uncertainty around this type of lifestyle. That you want something where you're trying different things and sort of you throw away what doesn't work and you keep what works, but you don't want to have to wait months and years, because that's really stressful and makes you even more sort of it's riskier. Right? It's riskier that you could lose this sort of type of arrangement.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because the more you're investing, the more you have to then just wait, and there's so much more of a waiting game, and just like you said, uncertainty. That's the big thing.
Exactly.
So when you're trying out small bets, so maybe just quickly, so you have a couple products on Gumroad that have been small bets. Userbase is your sort of, I'd assume.
It was my first attempt, which I think in hindsight, probably I invested too much in it. And I probably know with what I know now, I would probably tackle it differently. But now I sort of managed to position, I think I've managed to reposition it to be sort of still a small bet. It's sort of almost running on its own. It's sort of just breaking even in terms of profits and cost. And the future can only bring upsides, right? It's not something that I have to decide whether to give up on it or shut it down or whatever, right? It's just there.
Yeah, see, I love that. I feel like a lot of people have that binary. Like either it's a wild success or we shut down and start something new. And that really, like, that never spoke to me. Like I'm much more in line with the small bet mentality. So when it comes to Userbase, which Userbase is a secure login for static websites, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, then what kind of change did you have to make to shift it from maybe a larger bet into a smaller bet?
Yeah, I think it was I think fundamentally it was the decision to stop investing in it, right? And then sort of it's changed the product. It basically changed the roadmap a little bit to sort of in terms of cutting scope and figuring out what are the important things to have in there, sort of to give it the best odds of catching on. Although I would say even when I started, it wasn't one of those software businesses where I had like grand aspirations of it becoming like a $1 billion business or whatever. It was always a small business type of attitude that I took. But I think eventually I realized that I just want to cap my stake in it, right? And this is what it's going to be. And sort of the feature set ended up becoming determined based on that sort of attitude.
Oh yeah, because I mean features can be added pretty much indefinitely for software.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you moved on to, I don't want to say moved on because you've made a lot of small bets along the way. I'm sure some have failed and aren't as publicly known. What were some of the ways that you found sort of what to pursue, different opportunity? Because like I'm very much in line. Actually, I have a quote. I think I have it written down here. Just how opportunity comes from action. And you had said the more things you have going on at the same time, the less you have to be good at predicting what will work, which I think is so on point and something that people might miss, just siloing into one area. So how have you approached sort of the new project ideas and where you should focus?
Yeah, I think so. There was this defining moment, which was late in 2019, about a year ago, where I realized that I needed to change something because sort of I had this nagging feeling in my subconscious telling me you're on a risky journey. And I think the big attitude change was that I just wanted to just do something. I just wanted to do something small, extremely simple that would just increase my confidence. And believe it or not, actually, the very first thing I did wasn't even a business thing. It was pretty much I went looking for some freelancing hours. Basically, I thought because I had already spent like 10 months with absolutely no income, just seeing my savings account drop month after month. And there was already, even though I had quite a decent runway, I had like almost 5 years worth of savings saved, which was, I know it's probably quite an outlier, but I think it emphasizes even how uncomfortable it is to just sort of start seeing sort of the losses accumulate month after month.
Oh, yeah.
So I went looking for just a little bit of freelancing work, and I was lucky I had a friend of mine who needed some help, and I just took literally just 10 hours a month, so not even a week. Like just I was doing like $1,000 or $2,000 a month, not even covering my monthly expenses, but that was already significant in sort of helping with the peace of mind. There's a big difference, I feel like, from believing that if you needed to fall back to a plan B, you could fall back versus you already doing plan B. Like that changed, that clicked something in me. I said, wow, it sort of feels much better and sort of taming uncertainty. And sort of then I said, okay, so all those plan Bs, plan Cs, plan Ds that I had in mind, what if instead of just thinking of them like something that maybe I could do, I just try to do them right now, right? In the simplest way, like the most radical, simplest, easiest way to do them, right? It was by necessity almost, that I had to take a very rootless 80-20 rule, where I just do the 20% to try to get the most results and feedback. And the first idea that came to mind, and this was, I have to say, I was inspired by other creators and developers, and sort of trying to do a self-published ebook. I had seen a few others that were doing sort of quite well, and it felt like there was the two extremes again. Like I knew people who had spent like 2 years writing a book and spending like nights and weekends and feeling like it was a big slog at the end of it, where they spent lots of energy. Or there was sort of the other camp, like there were literally just did a brain dump in Word, sort of light editing, saved as PDF and uploaded it somewhere and just sort of started accepting money for it. And I was definitely much more inclined to the second one, right? And started thinking, like, what could I do, right? That could sort of, where I could sort of test this experiment. I would just wanted to see whether it's something that could become viable for me. And long story short, so I had already been growing a little bit of a Twitter audience. Back then, I was tweeting mostly about programming topics when I started, because it was the thing that I knew. And I was building user base, and sort of my daily life was mostly technical challenges. And I had lots of experience in AWS. I worked there for 8 years. Even before there, I had used it myself, so something that I knew very well. And I had already noticed that when I was tweeting about these topics on Twitter, I was getting lots of questions from people asking me more. What do you think about this and that? How do you sort of compare between these two things? I had started to sense the opportunity that people were interested in what I had to say about these things. So yeah, I chose to give it a shot, and to de-risk it even further, actually. A friend of mine who used to work at Amazon as well left, similar story as mine, left to sort of take a break from full-time employment. And I reached out to him and I said, look, shall we do this together? What do you think? And he agreed. And again, like it was just even, I could have probably written the book myself, but I think it made it more fun. And again, like the amount of effort we had to put into it. And I think when we counted all the hours spent, we had time boxed it. We said like we're not going to spend more than a month, but I think we ended up spending even less. Probably it was 2 weeks of full-time effort into it. Basically, we're meeting once a week in a coffee shop and doing like 2 or 3 hours of sort of roughing the outlines together, and then we spent probably 10 days full-time, just sort of again like doing this brain dump, some light editing. Chose a cover, and that's it, like very scrappy, but focused on information density and just sharing what we knew and what we thought it was going to be useful. And yeah, this was probably one of the best bets that I've had like in these couple of years. Like, this book ended up making over $100,000 in profit. So I split it with my co-author, right? So that was the arrangement.
And those numbers for a traditionally published book would be just
are hard,
unheard of. Yeah,
absolutely.
especially turning it around like that, which I love this story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And and then it inspired me to, I mean, not only inspired me, actually. I think the nice thing about sort of this, even this whole small bets ideas, is that to me, writing an ebook was my third or fourth preference in my head. But later, now I realize that actually I really enjoy everything about the info product sort of business. I enjoy creating these kinds of things, promoting them, marketing, the whole economy around it. Right now, I've even took sort of somewhat it's a weird arrangement that I have with Gumroad, where I'm part of the team now very recently. I don't know if you know this story, but I joined as a head of product in a sort of quarter time.
I saw the quarter time. I was going to ask you about that. So head of product. So it's like smaller than part time, maybe. So quarter time.
Yes, it's about 10 hours per week, and typically my arrangement is I spend probably an hour a day, like just check in, see there's nothing that's blocked on me. Then I probably spend a few hours on the weekends just arranging things and helping with prioritization and giving clarity to product features, which I use the product a lot myself, and I'm very engaged in the whole community of creators. I think it's working really well with me bringing my own perspective, helping with the product side. But basically, I think it's an example of the idea of small bets not only helps diversify your investments and your businesses, but it also, I think, helps discovering our own preferences. That helps me learn something about myself, which was obscure. Like, I never considered myself a writer or an author or even a creator. I thought I was a programmer. I like building software. And this sort of showed me another thing, that not only was it enjoyable, but it seems to be a viable opportunity, right, to make a living of. And this also opened more doors down the road, like this Gumroad arrangement and probably many other things to
Absolutely.
come.
So then you moved on to your next product. So
Yes.
I'm sure with the AWS product, with the ebook, you didn't have any sort of imposter syndrome, because you've been in that world for years. But then the next book you moved on, or next product, is your How to Build a Twitter Audience. So that's something that I find I love the different approach you took to creating that, rather than writing the book, sitting down and spending the time to write it, making it the video course. Mm-hmm. Did you deal with any, which we can dive into that in a second, but did you deal with any imposter syndrome, being that you were relatively new to Twitter, even though at that point you had already very much succeeded at Twitter? Like, you did very well.
Yeah, I think it's very hard. I don't know if this is a common thing, to be honest, but I think imposter syndrome doesn't really come up when you take this audience first approach. Right? You basically get, when I created that second product, I was getting, I'm not exaggerating, multiple questions a day, DMs and emails about basically building an audience. And it happened because I was sharing my performance of my first book, and one of the common questions, and in fact, I attribute most of my sales came from organically through my Twitter, right? Mm-hmm. So I was publicly addressing that question, right? Where are the sales coming from? And then this follow-up question was, how did you grow your audience from? I think at the time I had like maybe 15,000 followers in less than a year. People were curious. What did you tweet about? What did you say? What about this and that? What do you not tweet about? And so on and so forth. So I was getting so many questions all the time, and every time I was posting something about the topic, maybe answering a question on Reddit or on Twitter, or I was getting lots of engagement. I was seeing people were liking again, like what I had to say about it. So I think it's almost very hard to feel imposter syndrome when you're getting all that much engagement with what you're saying. So it's almost the opposite. Like, it's almost I think sometimes it can go probably the other side. And I'm careful sometimes not to sort of delude myself that I know too much about something. And I think it can happen, right? It's a risk because, I mean, we all sort of see the world sort of from our own anecdotal experiences. And I try to be careful even when I sort of structuring the course to not really promote things that I knew nothing about, right? But sort of just wanted to show an approach that worked. And I think this is an interesting sort of idea about the info product businesses in general. There's lots of, I believe, interest and demand for show. I mean, people want to be inspired, right? And they're willing to pay 15, 20, 30, or even more dollars just to sort of see something. I see an approach that worked, and just sort of it's an opportunity for them to be inspired to either do something similar themselves, or sort of or, follow the same steps and things like that. So it's sort of how I approached it. Basically, the Twitter course, it was just a few slides. I pressed the record. I talked over what worked for me and sort of some of the mistakes I did, and I wasted lots of time doing these that people didn't care about, and sort of how I managed to gain credibility, and how I managed to get engagement, by answering pretty much every question that I got. And I gave lots of examples, which I think the video format worked really well. and yeah, it worked. I mean, that product is approaching $200,000 in sales now. I released it in April, so yeah, this is 8 months roughly. It's quite incredible. And to be honest, I'm still surprised how still doing $300, $400 a day. And to be honest, I'm surprised, and in fact, sort of it's important to not. I'm sure it won't keep on forever, but it looks like there's this momentum of word of mouth that's coming from somewhere that I don't know what it is.
I wanted to ask you about that a little bit, because you are very deliberate not to be promoting it. I mean, you do your income reports and maybe some other smaller promotion, just saying that it exists, but you're very conscious not to focus on the sell more than the give. But you've still seen amazing results. So I was actually curious, do you what you attribute to those consistent results?
I think so. I do try to sell occasionally, and I make it for example, there was Black Friday and Cyber Monday this week. I did give an offers like almost everyone does, and it did really well. Again, exceeded my expectations. I think made over $20,000 in the sort of Cyber Monday, almost as good as my launch week, which is quite incredible. It's to be honest, I don't know. I think I feel like probably I could tweet about it right now, and maybe generate a couple of $1,000s in sales. But I think there's always a question in my head whether they would have come anyway, and I'm not sure yet. So I think it's like many creators, I face the dilemma of not wanting to be too, I consider my Twitter timeline to be a big asset that I have. I mean, people are giving me the attention. I don't take it for granted. I'm sure that people don't want to just be sort of seeing me just promoting my stuff every day, especially since there's many that have already bought it. So it's just noise then, right? They just don't care. So basically, I think the way I'm approaching promotion is that I try to wait until I find a creative way to promote something. So sometimes, occasionally, like roughly about once every 2 months, sort of I get some idea of how I can sort of promote something, promote my product, while sort of trying to be creative about it, like trying to even share something of value with, so it's like maybe something that a tidbit from the product itself or something like that. And I think those work well, because I think even people who have already bought the product sometimes, they get a reminder of something that's in the course. So again, it's an art, right? I think more than sort of a science. And to be honest, I think there's lots more even for me to get good at this. It's just sometimes I get like an idea and I feel like it's a gut feel. I feel like this might be a good tweet to send out. And I think even the timing matters. I'm very cognizant to try to not to if I had already done something similar, I might not do it. Right? But if it's been a long time since I did, and maybe sales are trending down, I think it might trigger something in my head to start exploring what can I do about it. This is actually, I tweeted about this recently. I think this is one of the interesting phenomenon of variable income. It's sort of when you start seeing your income dropping, I think something lights up in you to try to, you get more creative.
Uh-huh.
Right, to try to find a way. It's like the fisherman who's sort of fishing in a place and not catching any fish, right? It sort of triggers you. It's like almost forces you to go look somewhere else. Right?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point because you're getting sort of that dopamine hit. Like, oh, this is working, this is going well, and then you see it maybe taper off, it's not working as well, and then yeah, you just kick into high gear. You know that it's time to jump in.
It makes you I think it makes you smarter actually, right? I mean, the variability makes you more creative, makes you sort of not take anything for granted, because you know that it's almost the opposite of the steady paycheck. Like the steady paycheck has sort of the completely opposite qualities, is that whether you do an excellent job or a bad job, or whether you're delivering value or not, it goes from either steady to potentially, if you get fired, it goes to zero. That's very binary, from 100% to zero.
Yeah.
for most jobs, right? Whereas this is just more random, more unpredictable, but obviously it correlates much more with what you do, right? So it's very interesting. I think something that people find it hard to believe is that I think I think it's the variability of income. Paradoxically, I think it helps with peace of mind, believe it or not. And this is something really hard to explain. I think it's just once you start getting good at sort of figuring out how to fend for yourself and how to sort of manage to earn money regardless of all the randomness that's happening, it's sort of even more, I think, it feels even more safer than just having a regular 9 to 5 job that it could disappear, or you might not find another one like it, and things like that. So it's sort of
yeah, that you're resilient. You know that you're
exactly right.
self-reliant. You're able to deal with the next inevitable hurdle. Like whether we have a day job or we're on our own, there are these stumbling blocks that we're going to face. And yeah, I'm totally on board with it. I think self-reliance is something that isn't sort of, I think that's one of the problems maybe with the education system is we're not educating people on the self-reliance. It's sort of that still like factory trajectory of, oh, you go to school, you get a job, and you sit and stand when you're told, kind of thing. It's just a very different mentality. But yeah, I'm completely on board, because even when because we've been doing this now for over a decade, and when entrepreneurship, the more comfortable we get, the less creative I do. Like thinking back now that you say that, the less creative I do feel. So we're not really experimenting, pushing boundaries when things get a little too comfortable. And it's not too much money, it's just steady is the thing.
Steady, exactly.
Yeah.
Stability,
Yeah. So just to rewind to the Twitter course just for a second.
Yeah.
How much upfront preparation did you do? Because you had the slides and you recorded a 90-minute course, and now that course has gone on to like over 2 days, I believe you recorded it, but it went on to make a couple $100,000. So what was that investment of time?
That was even more extreme, I would say, and part of it was intentional, part of it was just the nature of the format. So, but I tried to it was part of an experiment for me, just for my own almost amusement, to try to see how much I can put the least amount of effort and try to make it work, like just extreme.
It's the programmer.
Again.
You're optimizing.
I think and sort of I didn't necessarily want to over optimize again, but it's just sort of I wanted to just not waste time on anything that didn't directly affect my sales, right? So I spent very little time polishing and editing. I think I counted the hours. It was, I believe, just 16 hours, pretty much spread over, I think, 3 days, from literally zero to the product on market. I spent, I think, maybe 4 or 5 hours on the first day preparing the slides. Then I spent the next day recording, and initially I wanted to do it in one take, but I ended up breaking it up in about 8 segments of recorded, like 10 minutes each. And I think the problem was that I rehearsed it so little that as I was sort of talking about it, I wished to remember something that I should have mentioned. So I think breaking it up helped me with sort of, just rehearsing a little bit just before I start
Uh-huh.
the next segment. And then I spent the third day sort of preparing the Gumnote product, choosing the price, sort of writing the description, and preparing an email for my newsletter and things like that. So yeah, no, it's extreme, sort of extremely high ROI. I mean, this is one of the fascinating things about this type of business, that you can put a few hours in, even if you, it's not as extreme as this one, right? But sort of the upside can make it such that it's it's very high ROI. Yeah, because they're scalable, they're one-time products. I think on the other hand, like obviously one of the downsides is that, unlike a software as a service business, you have sort of this sort of curve on the chart. It's almost like I was looking at, recently I saw a chart of like Beyonce's sales, and it followed a very similar pattern
Uh-huh.
as mine, right? There's like a big spike on launch day, and then sort of it goes down until you launch something new. And I think sort of this is the nature of this type of business as well, right? And
Yeah.
so
And it makes sense because you're satisfying what the customers want, and those customers then would be looking for. Ooh, my cat just jumped on a thing that was not solid, so sorry about that. But yeah, you satisfy what the customer is looking for. They're sticking around with you, but until you make that next product, you're not making the recurring sales. But yeah, I think that story is so inspiring because people, I think I think we sort of have a very binary outlook on a lot of things, that either
mhm.
like say something is luck or something is so much hard work that like I could never do that. Where I think that is such a gray, like I think doing and creating these things creates the opportunities that people see as luck, but identifying opportunities and running with them is really where it comes down
Yeah.
to. So I think the story of like how you did this and how you built the credibility. You built the credibility in the space and then invested that into a product. So even though it only took you 16 hours, it took you a year or a year and a couple months to get to the point where you could create that product. And
Yeah.
sort of on that note, I want to talk a little bit about credibility, because
Mhm.
I think that's something that people miss and that you have really nailed. Like you've sort of figured out, I almost hate to say the formula for credibility, but you started, like you said, from the very beginning, from the ground floor. And I really appreciate your approach to it.
Yeah, I think I stumbled, to be honest, into this. Like basically, something that we didn't talk about and wasn't very important, I think it turned out to be very important, is that the very first week after I left my job, I sat on here at my desk, and initially I thought I was just going to start prototyping and building something. And then again, like pretty much immediately, I had like this. I had my first crisis where I started imagining myself spending months or years building something, and I put it out there, and then nobody comes, or just nobody sees it, and then what? So I wanted to. I realized that outside of the companies that I had worked on before, it was completely unknown, right? Nobody knew about me. I had never done anything public before, no social media, no open source, nothing. And I started. I immediately realized that I wanted to fix that. That I wanted to have a bit more control over my destiny in terms of having a little bit of attention. And I started from very little experience. That again, so I started experimenting. Initially, I thought I was just going to write maybe long form blog posts about technical content because it's what I knew. But again, I wanted to try to find something very quick to try to sort of test my attention sort of grabbing capabilities. And the very first thing that I thought about that might be interesting to other people was actually the story about why I just left the job like the week before. And the inspiration of it came actually from, I had spent the previous week explaining to my colleagues who had knew me there for years why I was leaving. And many of them were quite shocked. Like when I set up time with them to tell them I was leaving, they thought I was going to tell them I'm getting promoted or I'm becoming a manager or something like that. They were quite surprised. So their reaction sort of told me, right, and all the questions that you asked me and all the time we spent talking about things, that if these 10, 15 people at work were interested about the story, maybe the internet will help me find a few thousand more people that might find this fascinating. So I think it was the third day sort of in my new journey, right, and I decided I'm going to just write it up. I spent a day writing up this blog post where I left my job to work for myself. And I shared it on the usual places, Reddit, Hacker News, and the Hackers, the usual forum where there's like group of people hanging around, like looking for inspiration. And it did really well. Like basically, I wrote about my motivation and why sort of the career as full-time employment, despite succeeding by pretty much every traditional metric, I was getting highly compensated, getting promoted, doing really well. I chose like to give up on that and do something different. And yeah, it resonated with lots of people. And this got me my first few hundred followers on Twitter. I think the first day went from 0 to 600. And then like over the rest of the week, it kept going around a little bit, got me, I think, up to 2,000 followers, pretty much mostly stemming from that post.
But how you used it as well, because didn't you end it with a call to action to follow?
Yes, which was I think turned out to be very important, to not just give something to people, but it invited people to just follow along, right? And many people I think followed, again, like either. I think many people follow, especially when you're unknown, people follow you if they believe they can get. It sounds harsh, but people follow you if they believe they're going to get something out of you. And typically there's either inspiration or some lesson. Like they almost need to feel like they would be missing out if they don't follow you. And I think that's very important initially. I think as eventually people will start following for other reasons. Sometimes they're just curious. Sometimes it's a story they've been following for a long time and they're just curious about how it's going to unfold. So it's not necessarily always self-interest, but initially it's almost always is. So it's good to sort of, when you're just making yourself known, I think to just sort of pitch to people like, follow me, because you're going to get something right out of it. And it was mostly people who were probably in a similar situation, right? That they felt they're demotivated in their current job, and they said, look, let's follow this guy to see what he'll end up doing. Maybe we'll learn something. So long story short, I tried a few things. I tried actually writing a few other blog posts. They didn't do as well. I tried to do some open source as well. I spent my first month trying out some software, sort of not that well. And then I started to gravitate more towards Twitter. And even Twitter was a bit sort of rough initially. I was talking about lots of random things. And I realized that, you can tweet about anything you want and you can talk about anything. But I think I realized very quickly that people will only listen if you have earned some credibility on what you're talking about. Like I'm quite interested in health and fitness and sports and other things, but people don't know me about those topics. And if I were to tweet something about nutrition, people will say, well, who are you to speak about this? Like, I have no credibility on the topic. I haven't earned it yet. But I realized when I was talking about things like, leaving the rat race or setting up yourself, for self-employment, I was talking about quite mundane things like getting health insurance and life insurance and setting up a business bank account, basic sort of mechanical things. But people were really liking these things. Right? There were, I was sort of realizing that what I should talk about should be probably at the intersection between what interests me, what interests my audience, and what I have credibility on. It's sort of that those three Venn diagrams, that the intersection is probably the sweet spot of what I should be talking about, tweeting or blogging or whatever. So yeah, super important. I think sort of the approach to building an audience, the most fundamental thing is that you need to build some credibility in some sense. And this is people who sell health and fitness products knew this forever, right? They start with the before and after picture, or some type of story where here's how I was and here's how I am now. And I think you need to do something of that sort, not necessarily exactly like that, right? But you can gain credibility by building a business. Like for example, right now I have credibility in the info product business, mostly because I've done it myself. I share a lot about it, right? And I answer people's questions, almost everyone that I get, right? So people start to think about you when they think about I don't have all the answers, obviously, right? And I make it super clear. And when people ask me questions, many times I start with, there's probably an infinite amount of ways how to do this, but here's what's worked for me, right? It was fascinating. I think I did an experiment back in March when the pandemic started and like advertising rates were going down. I did a little bit of a paid ads experiment with my info products. And again, like I had absolutely no experience before that. And I started tweeting a little bit about my experience and, learning pretty much as I went and taking screenshots. And it was really eye-opening how much, again, I went from zero experience with paid ads to posting a couple of screenshots on Twitter to like getting almost inundated with questions about, what do you think about this and that? Should I try Google ads or Facebook ads or what? It's like you can gain credibility just by having some skin in the game, being willing to share a glimpse from behind the scenes. Like I'm probably I would be fooling everyone if I claimed that I was some sort of expert on paid ads. I had just spent maybe $200 doing a couple of experiments. But I think it's interesting how much you can gain credibility by just having some skin in the game and being a bit transparent. That's almost all you need, right? And as long as you're genuinely transparent, I'm not trying to sort of hide something or spinning, putting some spin on what you're trying to say. It's a good way, right, of gaining credibility.
I think sometimes it's even better to only be a few steps ahead of the people you're speaking to, because you have just done this. So like saying with the ads, I mean, someone who wants to get into ads, talking to someone who's been doing it for a decade.
Very good point. Yes.
There's so much further down the line, so that I don't relate to that. But I relate to Daniel because he did this 3 days ago. And now, okay, we're both growing together, but you're still you're the teacher because you are the one a few steps ahead. You're one chapter in the book ahead of your class, kind of that notion.
Absolutely. And I think this is a good answer to the question of, many people tell me, like, I feel like I'm not an expert in anything, right? And, how can I build credibility? Like if I haven't been doing this for 10 years or something. This is a good answer, right? In fact, I've noticed recently there's been lots of great accounts on Twitter who's like mostly learning in public, right? They call it, right? It's like this trend where they're just figuring things out and sharing what they're learning, and they gain like huge followers, like huge amount of following, because they resonate a lot with many people that are in the same situation. They aspire to become developers, like they're mostly young people trying to become good programmers, and they're just and I realized, like, when people ask me about how do you get into tech, I struggle to answer that question because I started my career 18 years ago. Like things have changed a lot. I forget what's important, so yeah, it's sort of, this is why I called my Twitter course "Everyone Can Build a Twitter Audience," and it's a bit, I'll probably admit, right? It's sort of intentionally probably exaggerated a bit, but not that much, right? Because I really believe that even if you're just starting out life, even if you're just a 16-year-old who just only lived like college experience, or not even, like just high school experience, and there's probably something interesting about your perspective that will likely attract a following on the internet. That's one of the nice things about the internet, right? It's like all the small niches, all the experiences. People are just scrolling on their phone, waiting to sort of see something interesting, right? And you can sort of go in and fill up that need. If you have something that you're willing to share, right? And there's so much that's not shared. Like there's so many things that I would love to know, that people are not sharing, right? About millions of things.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
all opportunity. Like if you have that insight, if you live that experience, so that you can go in and share and gain a following. Now, depending, I think, on the topic and category, you could gain hundreds of thousands, or you gain a few thousands, but it's still like sort of it's the numbers almost don't matter, right? It's sort of, I think if you sort of have a decent sized audience, you have attention that allows you to do things. It gives you many options.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to the documenting. So it's not even like creating, you're documenting what you're doing to connect with people. And so for you then, how do you see drawing the line between documenting something that's going to help the audience versus like maybe on Instagram, like documenting being like people who wear outfits and things, like, oh, this is what I'm wearing today, which doesn't have like the value, maybe for some, maybe I just don't get that. But yeah, I feel like it can be sort of self-aggrandizing documenting versus documenting for others. Have you considered how to determine?
I think it's a good test. Pretty much. In the beginning, I used to almost form the habit where I used to spend like 15 minutes a day trying to reflect on what happened, to try to see what happened during the day that other people might find interesting. And I used to start thinking about, again, like sometimes even the most mundane things, like I registered a trademark, or I did this, or I tried that, like you take a screenshot. Nowadays, I think the process became so ingrained in my life that almost as soon as something happens, I almost immediately recognize that this would be, my Twitter followers would find it interesting, right? So I take a screenshot or I say something about it. And most of the times the inspiration comes from either I bump into something that I'm just going on with my day and just, bump into something interesting, or else it's just a conversation like I'm having with you, like you ask me a question and I realize that my answer might be something that my audience would find interesting. Sometimes I'm reading an article or reading a book and I realize, it's an interesting thing to convey. But yeah, I think the most interesting are like, for example, the tweets that you mentioned about building the house in the forest, that I was just preparing just for my own interest, just to figure out how much I've spent so far. That sort of, because I knew it was around 10,000, but I didn't know if it was much different. And as I was doing it in my sort of Apple Notes app, I thought, well, maybe people on the internet might. It's not something that I've been tweeting about a lot, like just building a custom house, but this is one of those things where it's nice to test and see whether people are interested, and it sort of fits a little bit in my theme of designing your own lifestyle and sort of just sharing something that might be useful. Of course, it's not going to be useful to everyone, but I try to be careful that you're not. And this is one of the problems with Twitter as a medium, right? Because when you have 50,000 followers, it's almost impossible to obviously be useful or interesting to everyone. Right. So, and this is one of the reasons why I chose to create an Instagram account, just to sort of separate a little bit those, like, so that I'm not like posting photos every day, like of the sort of the house coming up or whatever. There would be another place.
Yeah, and I really like that because, like I mentioned, you have two sort of, I don't want to say silos, but they're very distinct offerings between Twitter and Instagram, so people know what to expect. And I feel like that's, in terms of any social media platform, that can be one of the mistakes people make, is not sort of setting those expectations and knowing, even for themselves, what is it that I'm offering. What are some other mistakes that you see people make on Twitter, or maybe that you made early on that you, in retrospect, wouldn't do again?
So on this topic in particular, I think some people take it too far. Like they become too obsessed that their Twitter is going to be about one single thing. And sometimes they start with, literally start with the idea of it's going to be only about this thing. I think actually, in my case, for example, I changed. If you were to look about my tweets from a year ago or even before, very, very different. Right? And it changed based on what I happened to be doing at that time. And I probably lost followers because of this. I'm sure I had lots of people, lots of developers following me 18 months ago were interested in my tweets about AWS, which probably got bored about hearing about info products or sort of marketing or lifestyles or whatever, and then followed. But I think it's very hard to keep tweeting about something you're not experiencing, or to keep talking about something you're not experiencing right now, which is one of the reasons why I stopped almost talking about programming topics. I'm not programming a lot at the moment, almost nothing actually. It would be extremely forced to keep doing that. So that's why I think it's sort of important to find this intersection of what I'm doing right now and sort of what might interest the audience. And you're making a guess there, obviously, right? So, but I think if I were to generalize the idea, I think it's good it's definitely important to have interesting things in your life happening, right? Because it's hard to be interesting on Twitter if you're not interesting in real life, or don't have something interesting. And there's not a huge bar for something interesting. Right? Again, like it's what you choose to share. Like as I was explaining before, like even just setting up business accounts and getting health insurance, very boring things. Just because there's lots of lack of information online, people who are expecting to do those things find them extremely interesting, right? And social media gives people the ability to ask questions and they get answers. That it's really good. So I think the general advice is to start with what you're doing, right? And try to see and try to sort of articulate what you're doing, summarize it in a concise form into what might be what you think you would have enjoyed seeing if the situations were reversed, right, or where you didn't have this information. And this is a little bit about how I'm approaching the building a house project. Like there's so much lack of information about what's necessary, the costs involved, that just sharing these sort of small summaries of condensed information, I think people are finding they're very, very useful. So yeah, sort of start with what you're doing, filter out things that you think, filter only things that you think might be interesting to other people. I think it's okay for your topic to adapt over time. I think sometimes it's even okay to have a couple of things even. Again, I don't think it's that important to just be strict on one thing. But I think you pretty much play it by ear. Sometimes I post about something, I realize that there's not much interest, and it guides me to post less about it, right, or not do it at all, right? And there's not much harm to experiment. So
for sure. And I think that is a great point, finding the intersection of the Venn diagram, because that's how people connect with you. So it isn't like, I like the thought of a premise, and this is the premise of what I'm offering. But if, like you said, if you stay in that lane, it's really, you can't just have this one track that you can follow on. So I think that's all wonderful advice. And I think that's a great note to wrap on. I really appreciate you taking the time out here. Where should we send people to check out all your stuff?
Probably the best place is Twitter at dvassallo, DVASSALLO. It's pretty much where it's my platform of choice. I tweet once or twice every day, a little glimpse out of my life. And I think on Twitter, there's the link to my Instagram as well for who wants to follow my house in the forest project.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you again. All the links will be in the show notes for this episode, and I really appreciate your time. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
See ya.
Awesome.
I want to thank Daniel for joining me on this episode. Be sure to check out everything he's up to at dvassallo on Twitter. From there, you'll find links to everything he's up to, and also you'll find all of his links in the show notes. That's dvassallo. As always, this episode of Starting Now is brought to you by Built. Built is our platform for helping you get started online. Whether you want to start a blog or a business, head on over to built.co. That's bylt.co to get started. Built, your website, built for you simply. Finally, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. There is also a video version on YouTube, which is my favorite version. So if you check it out, let me know what you think. Give it a little thumbs up and a subscribe over there, because that's really my favorite part of this show is working on the video, shooting it a little differently instead of just two talking heads. So proud of that one. So if you check it out, let me know what you think. That'll do it again for this week. Again, I'm Jeff Sarris. This has been Starting Now, and I will see you next time.